know what you're about to listen to? The Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Colville-Andersen. That we need action now to battle climate change is obvious, important, and pressing. That so little action is being taken all over the world is also, sadly, obvious. There is a lot of room for improvement. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can and should also improve the narrative about climate change. It is often dark and depressing, with good reason, but if we are calling our citizens to action, then a more positive angle might be a good idea. It's basic marketing. I met Canadian author Chris Turner several years ago. I'm glad I did, not just because we became friends, but he quite simply has had the greatest impact on how I view sustainability, environmentalism, and looking for the positive in a big quagmire of negative. He first contacted me for an interview for a book he was writing, The Leap. We met on a square in Copenhagen on a lovely summer's day and did our author-interviewee thing, something routine for both of us. He gave me a copy of his previous book as thanks. Now, I was all booked out at that moment, so it lay on a shelf for a couple of months, until I finally picked it up, opened it, and read the first page. That was it. I was hooked. I consumed that book in record time. Not only was the quality of the writing exceptional, especially for a book about a traditionally sober and perhaps geeky subject, but Chris's thoughts were an epiphany for me, that fighting climate change can be a positive thing. The book is called The Geography of Hope. All his books are great, but this is probably the book I've recommended most to people in my professional life. Chris is the person I know who is most well-versed in the subject of sustainability. When he came through Copenhagen recently, we sat down in my back courtyard to discuss the narrative of climate change, the underexploited potential of cities to help fight it, and how to angle things more positively. You're probably the guy I know who knows the most about energy transitions, climate change. Generally, for me, it's the national politicians who talk about the climate change and what can be done nationally. We don't hear a lot about that in the cities. And, you know, I never have anything to do with the national politicians in my work as an urban designer. First of all, is there a disconnect between the conversation and the narrative about climate change on a national and global level and the people who are living in the cities, which is, most of us?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, it's not a total disconnect. When you go to, conference where, everyone's talking about energy transitions and climate policy and all that kind of stuff, there's always this sort of recognition, it's an urban planet. The majority of humanity, for the first time ever, lives in cities. More and more of us are going to live in cities. We're going to, cities are, dense and efficient and good ways to allocate resources for a planet of 7 billion that, needs to shrink its carbon footprint in a hurry. But it's not I think where the disconnect is when you look at the people who are really passionately committed to climate change, making the energy transition happen faster, solar power, all this kind of stuff. They kind of think about cities last. So, it's what is the global agreement? What are our Paris targets? Okay, now what's our national government doing about these Paris targets? And how can they be doing more? And how can they put more policies in place? And one of the last things they get down to is the really important question, actually, which is how do you get around every day? How do you heat your house? How do you, those questions, how does food come to you? Which for, the vast majority of us now is, in an urban environment. And in fact, some of the lowest hanging fruit on climate is sitting there in city. If people don't have to drive, that's a huge boost to the climate. And I think there's a little bit of that, like in a sort of virtuous sense of, in the same way I recycle and I, whatever. But there's not sort of a recognition that actually that's where you could move the fastest. City governments can move way quicker than national governments, certainly than an international agreement. And I think that's where I find myself. I mean, I certainly started looking at the big global picture, 15 years ago when I started writing about this stuff. And then what I found more and more was, ultimately where this is going to be solved is like the built environment, walkability, all that, we're sitting in Copenhagen where, the average carbon footprint, last I checked, it might even be more than this now, but it's 80% smaller than an urban person in Canada where I live. And a huge chunk of that is just because your day-to-day life doesn't involve, cars and there's some efficiency stuff going on as well, but it's just that you walk here, you cycle here, everyone takes transit. No one's driving, 15 kilometers to go to a big box supermarket. And those things ultimately wind up being way more important in a lot of ways than what is our carbon target? How many megatons will we have saved by? We'll save the megatons if we don't need them.
On a global level, what countries are the most interesting with policy changes that are going to have a long-term lasting effect, you know, and for all the citizens. You know, we're talking about the city people and everybody else, but what countries are sort of leading the way on policy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously, you know, the Northern Europe generally is kind of the world's leading region. We're sitting in Copenhagen, which is you know, a huge inspiration for urban policy in a country, Denmark, that has been a pace setter in terms of, you know, energy transition and energy efficiency and the rest of it. Germany continues, I think, just because of its size, and continues to have very aggressive policies as well. And, you know, the rest of Scandinavia is doing an excellent job. But the other thing you're starting to see, which is really encouraging, is some of the countries that I think people think of as the ones that we're going to, you know, are going to undo all our best deeds. So China and India doing really, really interesting stuff. Are they continuing to, you know, bring new coal plants onto their grids? Yes, and that's a problem. But they're also beginning to think longer term, like we want to be, you know, part of this clean economy. We want to have, you know, lots of solar and wind and electric cars. And I think the other thing you're seeing in both those countries is the much more direct, there's a lot more pressure because there's much more direct impact. I mean, if you're, you know, like in Delhi right now, you know, where several months of the year the air is unfit to breathe, that motivates people to say, hey, what else could we be doing other than, you know, choking ourselves to death? So I think, you know, there's a lot. You know, it's funny. There's never enough happening, but there's a lot going on. I mean, it's the overall momentum is absolutely toward this shift happening from you know, fossil fuel dominated economy to one that where a global energy economy where there's a much wider mix of fuel sources, where the general momentum is toward clean sources. It's the time frame, really. When you get a whole bunch of people who argue about this stuff into a room, it's the main argument is how fast and how much. It's not, are we doing it, or should we be doing it, or is this what we should be doing? It's more like, how do we get more faster? Mm-hmm. And that's it turns out to be, you know, understandably a very difficult question. We didn't build political institutions to move as fast as I think we need to, which actually brings us back to the city thing, which is that the one level of government in most countries that can actually move that quick is the municipal government.
Well, my question is going to be, I was very politically active when I was, you know, growing up, like
Right.
you know, super politically engaged, and then I traveled around the world, and you kind of lose touch with one specific, you know, country or whatever.
Yeah.
But since I've been working in urban design and with cities for the past decade, I've noticed that I don't really care about the national government anymore. Like, you know, I follow what's going on, but I'm going, you know, it's this monster that's doing a lot of, you know, stuff that doesn't really impact my daily life here in Copenhagen. So in a way, is that a fair comment that, you know, I should the national government, I feel a disconnect with them, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I'm more interested in our little crappy local neighborhood newspaper here in Frederiksberg and Copenhagen, because that is where you see people complaining about stuff that is relevant, you know, to me, and the politicians. You know, I see them on the street here. You know, I can ride my bike past them, and oh, that's the mayor or whatever, right? I mean, do a lot of people, do you think, have this disconnect, you know, with our daily lives and the national government, who doesn't really have anything to do with us?
I think it depends on circumstance. I mean, certainly there's, you know, in a lot of countries, Canada being one of them, the single largest constituency, when, you know, if you look at what happens in a national vote, the biggest chunk of eligible voters votes to not vote. You know, that's the 40% of, you know, like in Canada, you win a federal election with like 40% of the people who voted, and there's like 40% didn't vote at all. So I think, you know, yes, there is. What I find that some of that disconnect goes the other way, and I'm thinking more, I guess, kind of on the environmental activist side, the people who are really pushing for climate policy and talking constantly about this stuff, and they tend to want, like, they think the national government is the only level. Sometimes it seems. So, you know, in Canada we have these raging debates about pipelines, which are ultimately a proxy for, you know, are we going to continue to be a major oil and gas producer and continue to contribute to the problem? Which is a fair question and all, but winds up being just this incredibly divisive political debate that goes nowhere. And in the meantime, you're local, you know, like you're a good, you know, good hardcore green person from downtown Vancouver, or the toll bridges in your city just got flipped to non-toll to appease a whole bunch of suburban voters, while you were too busy arguing about pipelines to you know, have your voice heard on that. So I think there is that's a disconnect I see. And the other thing I think is the climate change in particular. Like, obviously the scale's enormous and the potential destruction's enormous, and so it makes people think, oh, we need these big, you know, it's got to be big, global, we need a global agreement, everyone needs to move all at once in one direction, and those things are necessary, but they're not the whole ballgame. There was an interesting thing, the city of Berkeley, California did this, like, very rigorous study of like what could we, as the municipal government of Berkeley, California, of this range of policy options, these range of things we could do, what would have the most impact on the overall carbon footprint, emissions footprint of our city. And the results came back, and there was like significant chunks for things you'd expect, like solar. If we put in subsidies for solar power, we'd see this much reduction in emissions. Subsidies for electric vehicles was a chunk. Energy efficiency was a chunk, but by far the largest chunk, like double the size of any other single step they could take, would be to put in place, like basically to change the kind of municipal bylaws so that higher density infill development was a lot easier to do.
Wow. Okay.
So just so that people could stop, basically so that as we're sitting here in Copenhagen in a very dense neighborhood that's also extremely livable, if all you did was mimic some portion of this in a place like Berkeley that's mainly not dense and is sort of low rise and residential, that would be a bigger step than any of the others. And it's like the last thing that an activist community thinks, hey, we should be going to city council meetings to push for infill development.
Yeah.
When have you ever heard someone say, that's never on the poster at the march?
No, I'm sitting here thinking of like the people, the things I read on Twitter and the links or whatever. Yeah, that's I know about density, and the people, my peeps talk about it because it's part of our job. But there's no protest march for density. Yeah.
And the other thing too is and it's why it's sort of it's dead easy to do in the sense that you don't need any, there's no technology involved. It's changes in bylaws and legislation. No, people push back on it, but once it gets momentum, it tends to, like, the great thing about it is we know, this as a city guy, once you get that that sort of good urban density, it makes everything about the community better anyway. So people when it happens, are going to realize, oh, this is not a bitter pill to swallow to prevent bad things from happening. This is just making our neighborhood better.
That's really interesting. Copenhagen and the city that I live in here in Copenhagen, Frederiksberg, they're limited. They can't grow. I mean,
right.
Frederiksberg is surrounded by Copenhagen. It's never going to get any more land ever. So they're pretty good at density just because they have to be. Copenhagen also, they have the ocean and they have other cities around it. So they're building new islands and stuff, reclaiming land and whatnot. It's not reclaiming land, because the land was never there.
No.
So it's just making land, I guess, right? But Malmo in Sweden, they can expand. They have, they're in the countryside.
Yeah.
But they've actually said, no, the border is the border, and we're just going to build up. And that's a really interesting policy they have there. Not like Calgary, where you live. Where you think when we were growing up, Calgary was the largest city in the world in area, with one mayor.
There was a single, and it actually, it's part of the reason why Calgary, like, sometimes statistically stands out, because it's a monopolar city, as they say. It's a single, so the entire, basically, rather than satellite cities having separate political units, whenever Calgary grows, it just annexes the land around it, and it becomes part. So all these places that used to be their own towns are now just part of the city of Calgary. As it turns out, like, if you do that, a city that's sort of thought of as much greener, like Vancouver, and Vancouver looks really green because they only count nice little dense downtown core with lots of transit and bike lanes and the rest of it. Metro Vancouver, the census metropolitan area is the term that Canadian statisticians use, is not significantly more dense or more walkable overall. The sprawl problem that Calgary has is one that's endemic to all of North America. It's just one, I think it's sitting on the prairie, it's monopolar, you can see it a lot clearer than you can if you're standing in downtown Toronto or somewhere like that. But it's not, all these cities are facing the same cluster of problems, and we're having the same political fight over and over again, which is basically, people saying, hey, we need more density, we got to invest in more transit, we want bike lanes, we want people being able to walk to the corner store, all that. And then this pushback, though, of what we actually have built, which is cheap, very, very car friendly suburbs, and those people saying we want a commute that doesn't take 2 hours. And those two forces push against each other certainly in every city in Canada, if not every city in North America. This sort of suburban model of growth versus, the old/new urban model of growth.
I mean, even here, we have 650,000 people in Copenhagen, but 2 million in the greater Copenhagen area, and it's a Sunday today. We can play frisbee out on the street in front of my home, but during the week, it's just packed with cars all heading home to the suburbs, as the parasites, as the Italian traffic planners call them, just using the asphalt, not contributing to my neighborhood in any positive way. We have all these shared back courtyards, right? Mm-hmm. There was a building down the middle here back in the day. Not here, because there's a big old tree, because this is where the trams used to turn around on that rounded wall here.
Okay.
But farther, all these buildings had, just called it a back house. And in the urban renewal from the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, where they cleaned up the whole city, they tore so many of them down to give us this green space. I've heard recently people saying, well, we got all that space in the middle there. Maybe we should build it again because
Right.
we got 12,000 people per square kilometer here in Fredericksburg, and we, we're looking at it different. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think we have too much value on our green space now. But the conversation has emerged a couple of times. Let's put those old houses back, which would be great for density, but you'd have to give up your backyard, right? Jeez.
Yeah, well, and I think that it's one of the funny thing in North America, certainly with density, is there's only two sizes. There's sprawling, single family home suburbia, and then there's 40-story condos. And this in-between density, which we all know, like if you study, I remember starting to, research climate change solutions and inevitably coming to, a whole bunch of these are going to be urban questions, city questions. And that middle density, the mid-rise, 4 to 8 story apartment buildings with, shops and offices on the ground floor, basically European city design, is by far, it's the sweet spot. It's where you get that you have enough density for transit, you have a good mix of uses, everything's very walkable, people like it. I mean, the funniest thing is North Americans come to Europe and, it was such a great holiday. All I did was, sit at the corner cafe and watch the world go by. Well, we'd like to put a corner cafe in your neighborhood and a little bit of that density. No, God, no, we couldn't possibly. That would ruin the character of our neighborhood.
Where am I going to park? Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's the ideal solution, field-tested, most effective way to make cities both more livable and more climate friendly is to build at this scale, and almost nowhere in North America do we build at this scale. We're starting to a little every now and then, like the neighborhood I live in Calgary now, you're starting to see 6 and 8 story condos with retail in the ground floor, and even then there's significant pushback.
Right.
I mean, they get built, thankfully, but I have neighbors who think, the traffic's going to get bad, and a 10-minute walk from the center of a city of 1.5 million people, traffic's going to get bad.
Yeah.
That's I don't know what you thought you were buying when you moved into this neighborhood.
All right, we have certain energy transition darlings, renewable, energy darlings. Denmark, I guess you would say Norway, Iceland, Portugal now, right? Germany. What about cities? Can you zoom in and identify some cities that are doing really cool things for to battle climate change, policy-wise or anything? You're going to say Copenhagen, probably. I know.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean,
I'm not fishing for that, but
Well, I mean, and it's it's the cities that are also highly rank high in livability ratings and have lots of people on bikes and good transit. Like Copenhagen and Amsterdam. I don't know Amsterdam as well, but I know it would rank highly. Oslo, increasingly pushing cars out of its downtown. Barcelona, which I know you know well. I don't have like in my head like a table of carbon footprint and urban livability cross-reference, but you'd keep hitting the same cities. But there are ones that you don't necessarily immediately think of. Singapore, for example. Even before they didn't even do this for climate reasons, although it turns out to be a great climate tool. But they pioneered congestion charging, and if you own a car in Singapore and there's a huge luxury tax on it, whether you have an odd or even numbered license plate says which times of day and which days of the week you can drive it. Into the city center, and they used all the congestion charging money when they charge people to use the downtown to build really, really good transit. And you see that actually in a number of Asian cities where the density or the transit investment or whatever else wasn't initially a climate tool, but it winds up helping a lot. Hong Kong's another city where the urban density there, the quality of transit, all that sort of stuff has made, and it's interesting because it's a city that I think a generation ago was kind of like in a dystopian movie. It was sort of like Blade Runner was kind of Hong Kong-ish looking. Oh my God, the high rises and the crowding and everything. And actually Hong Kong turns out to be quite livable thanks to all that in a lot of ways. Some of the, I don't know them personally. It's been a long time goal of mine to figure out some way to get sent to China on assignment, because I would really like. I know if you are at some big high level urban design or urban architecture conference, all the kind of top level guys all have their pet China project. It seemed like China was just going around to all the sort of Peter Calthorpes of the world, like, hey, can you build us a whole city from scratch? And I don't know how well all of those are coming together, but I know that they China is doing stuff. I think it's Shenzhen that just converted its entire municipal bus fleet to electric vehicles in a couple of years. So some of the scale stuff that they can do in a country like China, because of the size of it, because you have a central, command and control authoritarian government,
dictatorship,
yeah, which is not to defend a dictatorship, but if we're looking strictly on climate terms, or on urban livability, urban sustainability terms, some of the stuff they're doing is the right choice, and they don't have the problem that a lot of us do, of the pushback from people who are very dug into the status quo, and even if it isn't working terribly well, that's the thing that always kind of, there's a side note, but it always amazes me. I don't often have to drive in rush hour in Calgary, but every now and then, something's like, daughter's got a baseball practice she needs to be taken to at that time of day or something, and I get out into it, and the bottlenecks are all the places everyone knows where they are, and some days it's a little bit okay, but as soon as there's like a single stalled vehicle, it's just chaos, and you're just crawling along. And anytime I'm in that situation, I think it's weird to me that all these people around me are the people who push back against the changes that could possibly fix this. And I guess that's that gets into the fact that we're not really terribly good at everyone thinks the common sense would tell you if there's too many cars on the street, widen it and then you can get more cars through. But we know that's not how that goes.
Oh, God, yeah. That's why I just came back from Helsinki, and I was stupid late to catch the train to the airport, and I'm not really familiar with the train station and whatnot. Yeah. And I went, oh my God, I'm gonna miss my plane. So I went out and I grabbed a taxi. Right. And once in a while I do that. In my daily life here in Copenhagen, I think I spend maybe 2 hours a year in a car, but I'll take some taxis or be driven around in other cities. Right. But I felt stupid because I knew there was a train that was going to go, but I couldn't risk it. I was really cutting it. Right. And it's really cool in the sense that you got to remember this stuff, right? It's really cool to sit in that taxi and just freaking out because of the traffic. It was rush hour in the afternoon. Yeah. And I'm going, I am so stupid. I should have planned it better. Very Danish pragmatism. I could have totally planned this better. And then I'm going, wait, chill and experience this because it sucks. It's stupid. And you got to do that once in a while, right? Like you got to actually sit in that traffic to remember what you're fighting for in your work, right? Yeah. So I tried to spin it positively and say, yeah, this totally sucks, and I'm going to enjoy the suckiness of it because I don't have to do this in my daily life, and I can see what's possible in other cities, right? But yeah.
Well, recognizing that people do learn to... It was interesting. I was at this conference in Berlin. That's where I was right before here. And we were talking to a guy, one of the other journalists at the conference. He's from Delhi. India's urbanizing at a crazy rate, middle-class prosperity on the rise, so more people are driving. So apparently the traffic in Delhi is just horrific. And it takes this guy, he's 2 hours each way to work in his car. And I said, so, do you, is there any other option? He's like, no, we do have Delhi does have a subway now, fairly new metro, but it just, the routes don't work for him or whatever. And he was very much like, yeah, but I've gotten used to it, and there's things I do. So I think we're highly adaptable animals. People will figure out a way to make a little nest of their whatever commuter vehicle they're in, and decide that that's actually this is working great for me. I listen to 3 podcasts on my way to work every day. I value that time, or whatever it is. And I mainly mention that because I think when you or I are talking about this, we're like, why the hell would anyone choose to be in this traffic every day? But certainly in Canada, the majority of the population has chosen it in one way or another. Now they might not have consciously chosen it, but they are now. That is what they've adapted to. That is the system that, to their minds, delivers the life that they're leading that they don't think is so bad. And I think I only mention that because I think there tends to be, when we get going on this stuff, to kind of say, like these crazy people need to be liberated from their own insanity. And no, they made rational choices. They wanted to live in the kind of neighborhood they wanted to live in. Now, they didn't ask for all the in-between stuff. They didn't say, hey, because I want to live in, I want to have a house, that has a little yard, I necessarily need curving avenues that are entirely designed for cars and sprawl out. If there were other choices in the marketplace, they might choose them. But also, I think we have to remember that people do like the things that you and I look at and think, why would you do that? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I have friends here, who feel like they have to confess to me like I'm some sort of, urban priest. Hey, Michael, I know, I live outside of Copenhagen in the northern suburbs, and but it's just quicker by car. And I'm going, okay, I get it. It's that A to Bism. I mean, you're going to also choose the quickest route. And these friends of mine, they're going, but I actually, tested it, right? I rode my bike to the station, took the train in, and rode my bike to work. And it's 15 minutes quicker by car. And I'm going, then drive your damn car. And that's our job, to make that other options easiher for you. Yeah. I kind of understand it, right? And then the North American context is like it's the only thing to do. So yeah, if you suck it up and say this is the life I lead, I'm living my best life because I have no other options. But it's interesting how they feel like they have to tell me this, But to their credit, they test it out and figure out, okay, 30 minutes extra a day, I could be with my kids or whatever. I totally get that logic, right? They could maybe make that sacrifice, some of them, but I understand.
You're going to choose the path of least resistance.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we had to design better for them. The first book I read of yours, The Geography of Hope, you've got more books since then, The Leap and The Patch, right? Yeah. But this is my go-to. This is the book I think I've recommended most to other people in my life. But that really changed it for me, this whole narrative of you wanting to save the world after university, and idealistic young man joining Greenpeace, canvassing door to door. The planet is screwed. It's your fault. Give us some money. And then you were disillusioned at the end of the summer, right?
Yeah. Well, not even disillusioned. I think it was I wasn't very good at it to begin with. I'm not somebody who's good at knocking on random people's doors and convincing. I'm not a salesman at all. But more than that, it just seemed like this can't be the only story we tell about this. Hey, it's bad and getting worse. There had to be a way to tell it, and I didn't really know what I was looking for. I hadn't ever, thought in any serious way about what sustainability. I don't think I even knew the term yet. I hadn't, really looked closely at, what was happening in terms of, clean energy or urban design or any of this stuff. It sounds like
it's a dove. It's
okay.
Well, I'll let that one go.
That's a nice background. The Sunday doves of Copenhagen, cheering us on. So I didn't know what I was looking for, but I thought there has to what people are going to work toward. My kind of working hypothesis was you want people who come to. This is a great example. You come to Copenhagen. I remember coming here for the first time, and I was actually en route to the island of Samsø because they had this. They were becoming the first renewable energy island of Denmark and eliminating their carbon footprint. And I had just sort of vaguely heard, Copenhagen has this free bike program. I should check that out because this might be a thing that's going to catch. This was 2005, so it was not ubiquitous yet. And it was, you probably remember, it was old, like you put the kroner coin in and it popped out like a shopping cart in a North American parking lot. Yeah. You rode it around and then redocked it. And I got one from outside the central station. I sometimes rode a bike when I lived in Toronto until 2003, and I had a bike and I would ride it around, and you'd ride on back streets so that you're not dealing with traffic the whole time and all that stuff that you used to do before people thought about bike lanes in Canada. I just basically followed the flow of bike traffic, which I didn't know was suddenly there was people biking by. I'll follow them, and I was half an hour into it, and at the other side of downtown, the medieval downtown, and had this really pleasant. It was quiet, and I wasn't worried, and I wasn't anxious, and I just thought this is whatever they're doing here is clearly so much better than what anyone else is doing in terms of being able to ride a bike around a city. And that's really kind of the impulse I've chased is who's doing things way better, so that you can point at it and not say you're a bad person who has a giant carbon footprint and is destroying the world. You have these 5 different types of penance you can pick. Which kind of wouldn't you like things to work better? So that became my kind of guiding hypothesis was, let's find the stuff that works better. And you actually see this, just on a side note, we've talked about this before, but the Congress for the New Urbanism, for example, those guys did not come together as climate warriors. That's not, they're aesthetically driven. It's all about the beauty of the city and the rest of it. And yet, each year, the CNU gets a little bit more climate focused, because I think what they're realizing is all this stuff we wanted, because we just think it makes for nicer cities, also is a climate solution. Those things it's almost a perfect 100% overlap of the stuff that looks nice, feels nice, is good to people, also all happens to be good for the planet. My working hunch is this is going to be fundamentally more convincing for people if you're just saying here are better things to do than here's how to be less of a sinner against the planet. And we still sort of see that. I mean, I get the other argument. I get there's been this new wave since the last IPCC report about act in the next 12 years, or we're going to probably be looking at least 2 degrees Celsius of warming. I get that is an extraordinarily terrifying prospect to be staring down the face of. I still don't know, though, that the vast majority of the people who we need to accept some changes in their lives are going to be motivated by parts per million. I just don't know that that's going to be, in particular because, in a sort of, what's the collective action problem sort of way, which is basically collective action problems are, I care about my little thing a little bit more. It's not that I don't care about you, it's that I care a little less about you than my own well-being, and so we wind up creating these collective action problems because we're not organized on it. So if I'm not going to be virtuous if I don't know you all are not going to be virtuous or whatever. Similarly, on a time horizon, I think there's almost a collective action time problem, which is that if you hear on the news or hear from somebody you trust, we've got 12 years to save the planet or we're doomed and everything's getting worse by the day and extreme weather, and some days you wake up and it is weird weather or whatever, and you're like, yeah, that's true, I am kind of, but then a week later nothing materially has changed in your life. And so from your point of view, if, as a harried commuter getting to your job, dropping the kids off at daycare, picking up the groceries on the way home, whatever else, that day-to-day getting on with your life is going to outweigh your sense of, I really need to be, I don't know, driving a more fuel-efficient vehicle or living in a smaller house or what, whatever. If you're not immediately threatened, you're not going to feel that you're in a crisis. So trying to induce crisis, which has been a big focus in a lot of ways of kind of climate activists and climate change action advocates or whatever. Incidentally, the English phrases for this are all really awkward. Germany has, Germans, they have a word for everything. Klimaschutz, which is climate protection.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to have this big preamble of, people who want action on climate change. Yeah, so I mean, this kind of, induced crisis, I guess is the more I say that, the more I think that's what we're trying to do, is make people feel, we know that the long-term consequences of climate change are, very, very, very troubling. So how do I make that troublingness hit you right now? And that's, I think there's probably a role to play, but there tends, I guess, to be too many eggs in that kind of advocacy basket, especially since this last IPCC report, and there's kind of a wave of books now and articles coming out, like, here's how bad it's going to get. I remember reading the here's how bad it's going to get articles 20 years ago, and yes, it's part of the reason why I do some of the work that I do, but there seems to be a limited reach to that audience, whereas the, here's how your life is going to get better, or here's how to make a neighborhood work better. There's a whole other constituency of people that are reached by that message in a lot more effective ways.
Now, you segued elegantly into the next thing I want to talk about without even knowing it, so that was pretty much doing my work for me. That's great. Like, how do we talk about this? Our entire lives has been this narrative that the world is screwed, right?
Species extinction, habitat loss.
Yeah. Since the 80s, since you went in university and, canvassing, whatever. I mean, your book, The Geography of Hope, led me to start thinking about the communication side of it. Right. And I've said that environmentalism is the greatest marketing flop in the history of Homo sapiens. We've never failed so miserably for so long at communicating an important message. Right. We can sell toasters like 1,000 times more effectively than the world's dying, right? Yeah. And you're saying, like, it's just continuing, right? And that disillusioned you as when you came out of university and you wanted to look for other, useful solutions that mean something to regular people in their homes also, right? We're still talking about it, and the Germans are amazing for, all the work they're doing, but they really just ring the cowbells of danger, danger. It doesn't work. It's never worked in my lifetime or yours. So how do we talk about it here in Copenhagen, right? Mm-hmm. The world looks at us and says, oh my God, there's all these amazing things, it's great, and the Denmark. I always say it's infrastructure. We only ride bikes here because it's safe and it's a fast A to B in the city, right? Yeah. There's infrastructure. I recycle in great detail because I have, just beyond my bike rack here in the backyard, everything. Cardboard, metal, plastic, batteries, you name it. Now we have biogas, so all of our organic, waste goes in there and we generate gas somewhere in Denmark. It's great. Right. District heating, right? It's April and the city's going to turn off the heat in my home shortly, and then it'll be off until October because why? We don't need it, right? So they make that call for me. But we buy more organic food than any other country on the planet. 13% of all the food bought here is organic. Number 2 is Sweden, I think, at 9%. Whatever. We're not environmental warriors, but I buy organic food because that industry made it accessible to me. When they started, this is going to be a thing. We can either make like lots of money, like Whole Foods, $40 for an avocado, or we could just sort of gently, make more money over the long term. So super accessible for me to make the right choice at the supermarket. That infrastructure makes it me feel good in my daily life to buy the organic labeled food, or to ride my bike, or to recycle my garbage in the comfort of my backyard, right? How do we take that massive thing and communicate it better to people? Because we failed for 50 years. So if it's the same narrative now and the whole 12 years and we're doomed, okay, that's heavy shit, man. But
not only that. So I think I understand the argument that the 12 years to save the planet, we're going to be locked into a certain amount of warming. I mean, we're already locked into a certain amount of warming. That's just the fact of it. We're at 400 and whatever parts per million. There's still, and we're still a long way from zero emissions anywhere. So that is true. But is that effective messaging? And where I wonder is, if you start saying to people who, decision makers, even just the general public, you've done nothing to this point. I disagree that we've done nothing, but that's so now you've got to do way more, and you're bad at it, and you don't have enough time. if you're a politician looking to get reelected, does that sound like a winning message to you? I need to stand up in front of people and say, I've done a bad job of this, and I don't have enough time left to do it properly. Vote for me. And I think it, like, my fear there would be it becomes the reason not to act. Well, if we can't fix it in 12 years, then there's no point. So why would we invest? You hear this argument in Canada because we're having this raging debate about a carbon tax. Why would we invest, spend extra at the gas pump or whatever in order to fix our little 1% of global emissions when all the rest of it is going to doom us to the same level of warming anyway? Why would we bother? And I think that's that's where I think the underused messaging around, hey, we're not saying your life should suck for to make up for this. What we're saying is here's a toolkit. Like my favorite example of this, not because neither of us are big fans of the car, but the thing I like about a Tesla as a design paradigm is that Tesla did not set out to make the cleanest car. It did not set out to make a zero emissions car that was zero emissions and had no fossil fuel in it. They set out to make the best car on the road that happened to be electric powered, and that's what they did. And people buy those cars already not because they're eco warriors, but because that is a fast, sleek, awesome, sexy car. That's why it sells. Yes, also lots of the people who drive Teslas want to have small carbon footprints. Great, but it's it's the fastest car on the road. It's the safest car on the road. It does all of the stuff that the previous generation of motor vehicles do better. And I think that's where, I still feel like that is the underused part of the toolkit. Like, why are we not talking about the fact that, the Copenhagen example, everything you just said, day-to-day life in Copenhagen, if no one looks like they're bending under the burden of the fact that they must, do their part for climate change or whatever. It's just part of daily life without you having to think about it too much. And I think that's the part that we've absolutely behavioral scientists and behavioral economists and psychologists and the rest who've all looked at the climate problem, and they what they see is one that if it has to be a whole bunch of conscious choices, people are not going to always make the right conscious choices, so these things need to become just embedded in daily life. And then the other thing is the way we actually make decisions to change what we do is not for these rational reasons. It's not because someone showed us some statistics about our carbon footprint that made sense to us. It's because this is what people like me are doing, or this is the new wow, I really, I saw a guy with this, this great phone. I want a phone like his. That's how we actually make those choices. And that piece of it, I still feel like, even though, it's people working on behalf of climate policy think tanks and things like that who keep digging up all these psychological studies saying here's why the messaging doesn't work, the response tends to be no, we just need to message harder or something. Like, there's not that sort of moment of awareness of, okay, we need to kind of rebuild what we do from the ground up. And I think you'll see that. I wonder, actually, you see this, the Fridays for Future movement, which is incredibly powerful and inspiring, and good on Greta and all the kids who are following her lead. But they will eventually, that passion to see something happen eventually meets up with the reality of political systems and political institutions where the levers of change are not down on the street at the demonstration, and where the thing is not designed to move very fast, and it's not designed to. And I think this is one of my big lessons of the last 10 years, getting involved more and more in politics and doing some behind the scenes work and stuff. Is this institutional, thing called Western democracy not built to move fast. It's just not a rapid response to anything. So how do you make it do this very, very difficult task that you've decided to set for it, which is to guide action on climate change? And the answer may be that you don't, this brings us back to where we started. Maybe you go to the municipal government first, rather than, hammering on your federal government to change their climate target and, put a higher tax on carbon. Not that those aren't good things to do. Maybe your more effective thing would be to just overwhelm city council the next time they're talking about density.
And the C40, this is a thing, and they have their big conferences here in Copenhagen later in 2019. So that's sort of a sign that cities are the new nations in a way, because of change is more effective. But the daughter of the Canadian scientist David Suzuki spoke at the first climate conference in Rio de Janeiro, and it's on YouTube, and it's powerful. This young kid, and now we have Greta Thunberg, but nothing happened. And I love Greta Thunberg, and I love all the kids who are doing this. It's wow, that was really awesome, and I wish this, and I hope this will go to that place it needs to go. But I don't have a lot of there's not a lot of data to support that it's going to work, right? But So I'm wondering about still how to talk about it. Cycle chic, when I started the Copenhagen Cycle Chic blog and that movement exploded, and most of the viewers were women just looking at photos of other people riding bikes.
Yeah.
And
like flipping through a fashion magazine, same thing. Yeah.
Flashcard advocacy, I called it. I'm just saying, yeah, this is normal. Yeah, this is normal. Yeah, this is normal. And just the testimonials I received through the years from women all over the world, like, I can ride a bike in heels. I knew I could, and now or in my business clothes or whatever, and boom, empowerment, right? Super cool, because it was showing them every day.
Yeah,
normal,
which is absolutely I mean, that's like right out of the pages of the behavioral economists, all the people who built on Daniel Kahneman's Nobel-winning work, and that's basically the thing. That, I mean, my example of it that I often use when I'm talking to certain kinds of audiences. Why is it in politics, in North American politics anyway, there's so much emphasis on knocking on doors and getting people to put a sign on their lawn that says, vote for so and so. The reason is because it is extraordinarily effective behavioral marketing that says to everyone in that neighborhood, people like me support this person. So particularly if you're asking them to do something that's a bit out of the ordinary, like in Alberta, where I live, and we're having an election right now, and people aren't used to voting NDP. But if you see an NDP lawn sign in your neighborhood, you think, oh, maybe people like me are not so conservative as I thought, or maybe, and that is exactly what you're describing with cycle chic. Hey, maybe I'm not weird to want to dress nice and then ride a bike,
or just dressed like in your normal clothes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's that piece of it. I don't know. Like, I think that there's disconnect that we're kind of trying to unravel here. That's where I think some of that is that often, or too often anyway, the messaging around climate change is so the thing you're going to need to do to make this change happen is kind of weird, and you've never heard of it, and it doesn't sound like anything anyone like you did. So are you ready to do it? Well, no, that's not how. That's how people make change, particularly when you're asking them to make changes in like really basic stuff, like how you heat your house or what the way you get to work every day. Stuff that people think of as just like bedrock. I don't want to think about this decision. I want it to be a routine and not have it be kind of in my face in any way. And so I think that's the part where, and we are, I think, starting to do a better job of that, but that's where you see, I think, the biggest gap between, we've got to save the planet kind of rhetoric and here's what people can do.
Yeah.
That when that conversation gets translated down, it's often not terribly usefully. I'm sure you do too. You wind up at a conference or something like that, and you're on a panel talking about this stuff, and there's always so tell, what is your one thing that you think everyone should do and it's always, well, you could change out all your light bulbs to LEDs, and I inevitably will say something about, well, you personally need to become part of a political movement that can change, I really don't care what you personally are doing. I really don't. Get on an airplane and fly around the world and land, and then when you land, start a political movement that can actually make a policymaker change what they, change the way things work. And hold on, I mean, we were talking about this, but this is where some of that disconnect happens too, where the C40 mayors and stuff like that, and Bill de Blasio in New York held up as this great climate champion, and he says all the right things about the stuff that has nothing to do with him. He is absolutely committed to not building pipelines and to reducing the amount of oil we produce from the oil sands in Alberta, which is nowhere near the city of New York. But if you're a cyclist in the city of New York, he does not give a crap about you, and there's massive evidence to that. And that's where, if you're a climate advocate in New York, you should not be fighting about whether or not to invest in pipelines. You should be forcing your mayor to properly police the bike lanes. That's where,
And to slow down the cars and congestion charge and whatnot.
All that stuff, yeah. That's where, and you actually have control over that. You don't have a lot of control over the global oil industry. Not as long as you're still using their product, anyway,
Bicycle advocacy that borrowed everything from the 70s and 80s in the environmental movement. You still see bicycle advocacy groups, banging on about saving a polar bear on your bike today, and all of that. Ride a bike; it's healthy, it's good for the planet. Nobody rides for that reason. They ride if there's infrastructure, right? It's interesting. One of the best campaigns I've ever seen, and it's really not a tough competition to have a really effective behavioral change campaign for bikes, was the city of Malmo in Sweden, where they started no more ridiculous car trips. They wanted to reduce the number of short trips by car under 5 kilometers, and put people over to bikes or public transport, whatever. And so they had motorists write in with their stupidest car trip. Yeah, actually, there's just one thing I do every morning, it's totally irrational. And then they won bikes for the whole family, whatever. They did it for years, and they actually reduced the number of car trips. So that humor, Environmentalists are not funny fuckers. They're not the people I go out and drink and have fun with.
Or they are that person, except when they are speaking with their official environmentalist hat on. At which point you must be grave and it must sound desperate and grim and the world. Whereas I think like that's such a great idea for a campaign. As soon as you started saying, I think every single Canadian probably has a story of like driving from one end of the shopping mall to the other because it was just. I mean, and this is like it also. I mean, you could. There's a whole second message. Like one of my favorite things, I do this and drive my kids nuts because I pointed out so much, is like in North American shopping mall parking lots, there'll be like a sidewalk that doesn't go anywhere or just abruptly stops, and then you're just now out into the asphalt wastes with you to fight against the cars. The craziest example of this, which I use often when I'm talking to audiences about design and how it shapes our choices, is the Children's Hospital parking lot in Calgary has no. There's even a space that would, even though it wasn't designed for it, where the cars are facing each other and in the underground parking lot, and there's kind of a lane in between them. So there you look and there's a kid in a wheelchair, a kid in a stroller. That would be, except they put signs in there to say this is this kind of parking and this is that kind of parking. So the messaging telling the cars where to go is so much more important than keeping kids safe that they messed up the one accidental safe space that they built in a children's hospital parking lot. And I think the reason that's effective, I think of it as effective. I think you remember. It's the same way you remember when you did stupid stuff of your own. People remember funny stories. Even if there was a point where, it was really effective messaging to scare the crap out of people and say, we're in deep trouble and getting deeper. That message has now so fully saturated the conversation that I think anyone who was going to be moved by that has already been moved by it. I don't know you're going to convince a lot of new people, who justifiably, frankly, can say, for 25 years, you people have been telling me that the sky's going to fall. It hasn't fallen. It's gotten weird, but I'm not a climate refugee, escaping a maelstrom of hell. My life's still pretty okay, actually. So
my hockey team sucks, but other than that, everything's pretty much the same. Yeah. Okay, I have a dear friend of mine in Berlin, an American woman. She teaches sustainable stand-up. She does workshops to get people to be able to talk funny about the grave challenges we face. So that's also, I'm thinking, connected with the no more ridiculous car trips in Malmo. Yeah. It's an uphill battle, I think, making it funny in order to change behavior. But that might be the most effective way to go when we've had 50 years of failed marketing techniques.
What I think is that Bruce Sterling, sci-fi author, futurist, calls hair shirt environmentalism. I am suffering and come suffer with me. Sort of that should be the tone. And he talks about that. His argument. This was years ago. He wrote a kind of an one-off essay on this subject, but it was that part of it stuck with me, where he was basically saying this is basically the inverse of the have anything you want wherever you want. All it does is just stand it on its head. It doesn't actually challenge the basic assumptions of the system. It just says the system, which you've been hearing is completely right, is actually completely wrong. And I think there's a limit to who is moved by that argument. I think the constituency might be getting bigger. I think you look at advocates they'll point the vast majority of people in most of the world now accept the fact that climate change is a scientific reality and that sort of thing. But I mean, geez, that's 25 years in, that's your success story. People don't think don't think it's fake.
25 years of messaging and we got to that point. Oh my god. Yeah.
So and I think this is the other thing, is when you get every now and then you see these little breakthroughs, and it's always, or I shouldn't say always, often, like I'm thinking just out of nowhere, and I'll have to explain the full context for your listeners. So here's a climate disaster. There was a major flood in southern Alberta in 2013. Century level flood. City of Calgary, where I live, half the entire downtown had to be evacuated. Several small towns and cities around us were completely flooded. As in every single time this happens, there's a little, you can't say definitively that's what caused the flood, but we know that, climate change was a factor in making in exacerbating the problem, and it makes that kind of flood more likely, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, Mayor of High River. High River is not a town full of environmental radicals. It's conservative heartland, small agricultural ranching community south of Calgary,
like an hour south or something.
Yeah, about that. And when they were going to rebuild the downtown, the mayor just got in my. I can't remember. I think somebody came to him and said, "Hey, when you're rebuilding, do you want to think about like wider sidewalks and maybe some space for bikes and pedestrians and a nice urban environment?" And the example that they used was Banff, little pretty little mountain town, world famous ski resort and the rest of it. And there was a bit of pushback at the council level in High River, like, well, yeah, but we're not Banff. We're not a big tourist destination. And the mayor's response, which is great, was, well, so that means we can't have nice stuff? Why don't we just have some nice stuff? And they wound up doing quite a nice job of rebuilding the downtown. And again, I think like the part of the message there is that if you show people good stuff, they'll want more of it. But also, like, the mayor didn't get up on a big, like, oh, we must, for in the interest of climate change, we must widen the sidewalks and make it more walkable, even though it's going to hurt. Like the message was more like, hey, I want it to be nice. Well, if it works there, why wouldn't it work here? People are people. Why are we acting like there's some special case when you're in a mountain town that you deserve a nicer sidewalk than and I think that's that side of it. There's a little bit of humor. There's an edge of humor there, but it also comes around to this idea of like, what let's stop beating people over the head with how bad it is or how bad it could get, and let's tell them we want to give you something nice, and here's how much you'll like it. It'll be great.
Now, we were out last night, as we do, drinking some wine. I just got back from Helsinki, and I talked about this guy. Comes up to me after the keynote and says, "Yeah, but this is all bikes and stuff. But we're in Helsinki. We have hills here, so people aren't going to ride." And I'm going, dude, you have like 11% of the population already doing what you claim is impossible, right? Yeah. So of course, infrastructure will lead to more people. I mean, and the Finnish winter. You don't understand the Finnish winter. And I'm going, you live in Helsinki, so neither do you, because you don't have what you have in the Arctic. It's a little bit colder than Copenhagen, maybe a bit more snow, but it's not it's not the Arctic, right? And in my book, Copenhagenize, I have a chapter called about myth busting. And if I had like €1 for every time I had to bust a myth, man, I would have flown you into my island in the Bahamas, dude. Jesus. So like, what are some of the stupid stuff that you hear from people regarding climate change and all that?
Well, I mean, climate change, it begins with the facts of the case, which is this is probably my favorite in an ironic quote kind of way. Where someone comes up to you, and thankfully happens less and less. Comes up to me after a talk, or sometimes it's like someone at the most recent one was at a neighborhood barbecue, and the guy heard you write about climate change. Well, do you know about and as soon as it's out of his mouth, do you know about? And I'm like, this guy is going to say solar forcing, or he's going to say something about natural glacial cycles. Or basically, he thinks. And this is the amazing part. This guy thinks he, in his 10 minutes of Googling, outsmarted the entire global scientific community. And he has cracked this thing. And he's going to tell me... And then I wonder, like, when I walk away from this, I think it gets down to like how little people think about some of the stuff that comes out of their mouth. Because you think, like, does he honestly think? Like, I was just in Berlin at this energy transition conference where all these senior German government people, senior people from governments around the world, did they all are we all like standing up and giving speeches to each other and then snickering behind our we've sold them on this really good? No, this
another 200 people, we pulled the wool over their eyes. Yeah.
Like, what does the huge amounts of investment and science and engineering and production that has gone into making solar power a viable, affordable thing around the world. All of that was a bunch of people who were either completely deluded because they hadn't read the one thing this guy had, or somehow this was just the biggest snake oil sales job in history. And I'm sure it's like this for you when you this myth busting. You're like, Jesus, do I really have to explain this? Is this really all right? Fine. So that whole cluster of things, they're so well trod now in climate change circles that as soon as I hear there's like 3 or 4 phrases: solar forcing and little ice age, and you're one of these people who thinks you've outsmarted the climate scientists. Okay, we can talk about this. The next big kind of tranche of myths is all the stuff that, this won't work, or it isn't working, or... So I hear routinely, for example, because I wind up talking about Germany, mainly because Germany was the first big industrial nation to do a lot. And so you can... this is actually interesting for you. I'm sure you've heard this before. If you talk about Denmark or Scandinavia generally, people are like, oh, yeah, but they're different. They're not Homo sapiens, I guess. Yeah. They're some sort of mythic forest creature of the north with Viking helmets, and that's why they were able to do this, but that's not relevant to me. Germany, for some reason, at least to a North American audience, Germans are doing it. Maybe there's something to it. And so you end up talking about, what Germany's doing. And now, like any country going through this energy transition, it's messy and there's steps forward and steps back. Germany accelerated the phase out of its nuclear power in order to appease the very, very strong anti-nuclear sentiment in the country. And that meant that they relied on coal for a little longer than they were planning. And so this is all, like, none of this is unknown. Like, if you follow this stuff, if it's, and it is literally my job to know this shit. I know this shit. And you come up to me at a conference like, I heard that renewable stuff didn't work in Germany and they had to build a whole bunch of coal plants. Well, wherever you heard that was not my sources, because my sources know what the hell is happening. And do you want to talk rationally about what you've heard and why it's wrong? And usually they don't. The people who do this, I have this one fact that you don't know that's going to blow your whole world apart. They're not looking for a real debate.
No.
They're highly motivated to somehow, for whatever reason, remain skeptical about this thing that is demonstrably happening in the world. The embedded energy in solar panels, the fossil energy that you need to produce solar panels, outweighs any positive climate change impact, which is not even remotely true. But that people, and you can. This is where we get back to the behavior change thing. If you are strongly, strongly motivated to believe in a thing or accept an argument because it's your gang, your people, your tribe are anti-climate change or whatever, and you can see, because you're somewhat sentient human being, oh, there's a lot of stuff out there sort of indicating this is real. I better really find I'm going to hunt even harder for the counterfactuals, which is why for example, some of the long-term behavioral studies of climate change and climate change denial have found that it's not ignorance. Like, it's not the people who know nothing about climate change who are the strongest anti-climate change zealots. It's people who've actually learned a bit. Like they think that they've made they've found the convincing counter-argument.
They Googled for 30 minutes, not just 10, right?
Not just 10. So there's a whole other great wave of myths, and then now, and it really is just it's like you can see the bar gets moved a bit further every time. So now in Canada, for example, a lot of it is about not that we shouldn't do anything about climate change, not that it isn't happening, but what we're doing doesn't matter. Why would we bother having a carbon tax? Our emissions are way too small to matter. Carbon taxes aren't that effective, and I've learned 3 facts that aren't facts about why they're not effective. And so, why would we go through all this pain? And it's not all. It's 4 cents on a liter of gas. It's not. And for Europeans in the audience, our gas is incredibly cheap compared to yours already anyway. So So now it's that yes, it's happening. Yes, it's serious. But the thing you're saying we should do about it doesn't work, or won't matter, or and then there's or we're gonna come when it comes down to it, we'll come up with some silver bullet, nuclear fusion, magical, perpetual motion machine to fix the problem. All of it ultimately stems from the same thing, and it's the same with the bike people. We're social animals, which also makes us tribal. And so, for example, the car commuters of the world are, feel like they are all part of the same, social milieu or however you want to, and they defend their. This is you're telling me my routine that I do every day is wrong. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. So I'm going to find the few facts and also the fact that we all this. I'm sure you run into a lot. Everyone thinks they're the special case. Maybe in Copenhagen they can shrink their carbon footprint, but they don't have they're not in Canada with our the huge wide open spaces. We can't you're not going to ride a bike across the prairies so everyone thinks they're the special case and everyone kind of buys their own bullshit basically.
So the new one, it's only a couple weeks old. I don't. You might not have heard it yet, but wind cancer, like Donald Trump saying that wind causes cancer, right? Hashtag wind cancer. It's great how But these people that come up to us because we are who we are, and they feel like they need to engage us with their 10 minutes of Googling or whatever. I mean, we're just humans, and we're in good moods and we're in bad moods. We're hungover, we're tired, whatever, or we're on top of the game, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's just I get more abrupt, I think, with people. Really trying not to be rude, trying to be funnier than rude. Depends where you are in the world, how that works out for you. But Lisbon. There's a woman. Lisbon. That wouldn't work there. I live there, and we have hills. I was just tired, and I said 85% of Lisbon is under 5% grade. 85%. Never mind the 2 little bumpy hills. No. Oh, but this. No. I was just shutting her down and smiling as I'm doing it, and sometimes you just get tired of it. But in a way, we have to do it, right? We have to keep
You do, although
you got to be polite to people who want to talk to you, right? But
yeah, well, and I think you try and gently say, okay, I understand, that you think that this thing you're telling me is relevant, but here's why I don't think it is. And I don't think that these are people who come up to you to have a rational conversation. They are trying to hurl a truth bomb at you, and so anything you come back with is just you obfuscating. And to some degree, I mean, it's maybe you assume, like, if you come up to me and start talking to me about climate change, that I've had to hunt as hard as you did to make my case, as opposed to it just being absolutely abundantly clear that this is what's happening. But ultimately, I think this is where we get down to certainly what they've found in the psychological research around climate change is that people are really only going to be motivated to accept that it's something that they need to do something about, and the kinds of solutions they'll accept when it comes from within their social milieu, their tribe.
Right.
when it's, and there's great examples of this. There's one I'm thinking of right now because I'm going back to Canada and going to a wind energy conference, and we are quite likely going to go from a left-leaning government to a right-leaning government in the province of Alberta where I live, and this will change things a lot. They've run on dismantling all kinds of climate action, the rest of it. But there's a great example where Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, not a particularly bright man, certainly not somebody who really understands climate change. I believe he's in the let God sort it out camp. God will provide. But he is within the limited landscape of Donald Trump and his administration and hangers on, a pretty strong wind energy advocate. And that's not because, that's not because he, got religion on climate change. That's because Texas while he was governor, was making piles and piles of money in the wind energy business. And so he, a guy like him, religious, conservative, Fox News worshipping, not terribly bright guy, does know, when the going's good.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind, I think, there's a chunk of. I mean, the U.S. is an extreme case. The Republican Party is the single largest and most well-funded and organized climate change denial organization on earth, by far. And when you tell Americans that, I think they assume, no, but everyone else is having this debate, right? Not the way you guys are. Like, it's this insanity where it's, an entire... Canada, for example, there are still probably some deeply skeptical / denialist people in the Conservative Party of Canada, but they have to have climate policies now. They can't pretend it's not their climate policies are terrible, but they have to have them. Otherwise, they don't look legitimate. They don't look like they're capable of governing. A guy like Rick Perry can become a wind energy advocate without ever having to buy into the climate change thing. And then he becomes a much more effective voice within that world of Fox News watching climate change denialists who don't think science is real, where he's going to be way more effective. If it's coming from, the governor of California and those weirdos out there, or some climate change advocate, environmentalist, probably a communist, there is no set of facts you're going to deliver in that package that's going to work. But Rick Perry going, hey, there's a lot of money in this.
I find it interesting, you have to educate people in a way about their own history in their country or city or whatnot. Oh, we never used to cycle here, to kind of a little bit arrogant, smiling young urban planners from Singapore. Oh, but Michael, it's all very nice, but we never cycled here, with that smile of I know everything. And it's getting easier, is my point now. Archives are being digitalized, so I can go out and find 10 photos that say you did cycle in Singapore. It was massive, and just people cycling to work in the 50s and 60s, whatever.
Every city in Asia was a bicycle city at some point.
Every city in the world, almost. I mean, there's even photos from Calgary back in the day. It was their bikes down, in the downtown and stuff, right? So, so it's easier. Also, it's hot here. This is Florida, Michael. Yeah, so go to Seville. Because Seville's done it now, 0.2% to 7% on bikes in 4 years, network of infrastructure. My job's getting kind of easier, solar's not going to work in Alberta. I remember you writing, you're going, Germany's transitioning to solar, and they don't have any sun. It's really...
Well, and in fact, I mean, this is where, our comments, because I've absolutely got Trump-level, Trump administration people what are they going to do with the solar panels in the winter? Because, they literally know so little about it that they don't realize it doesn't have to be hot sun. The solar cells aren't heat sensitive. They're reacting to direct solar energy. But the southeast corner of Alberta, and I've told Alberta audiences this, and usually they're like, oh, really? Gets as much sun over the course of a year, available solar energy as Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
And no one in Medicine Hat, Alberta, thinks of themselves as living in a similar climate to Rio de Janeiro. There's no Copacabana beach, but they get just as much sun.
Yeah, hours of sunlight.
Hours
per
of
year.
sunlight per year, because it's an extremely sunny part of the world. Like
Yeah.
you can go weeks and weeks in southern Alberta and not see a cloud.
Oh, Windsor. I flew into Windsor last year, and around their airport is all these solar. It's a solar farm around their airport. It's just empty land. If a plane's going to crash, it's going to break them. But I mean, it's not. There's no homes or anything. But obvious. There's a lot of obvious spots for that, and you see it when you fly. You're in the middle of the States, flying over continental U.S., and you look down and you're going, there's like windmills, wind turbines, right?
Yeah.
And it surprises you because you're thinking that they don't care. And
Iowa is a big wind state.
Iowa, cool. Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wind. Province of Ontario, which Windsor is in, is a great example of how, when we're talking about like effective climate messaging and things like that. So, Ontario directly copied the German Green Energy Act. Like basically, the feed-in tariff, it creates sort of incentives to do renewable energy. You pair that with some industrial development, you create jobs. It'll be great. They did a couple of things to the legislation that were not perfect. That some of the German policy people they were working with said, don't do that, it'll cause problems, and it did. But the larger thing that happened, basically, was when Germany rolled out its Green Energy Act, and continues to this day, it's embedded in a national narrative. Like, it began with, we're going to have 100,000 solar roofs in Germany. There'll be 100,000, nice little German homeowners with solar panels on their roofs. And then, it's this is part of our mission to the world to help renewable energy be ready for prime time, and we're German engineers and we'll be good at it, and we can do this. And now now they the Energiewende, the energy transition, we are teaching the world how to manage this shift from one thing to another. And they were very like the original policy guys who I've interviewed and tracked their careers and the rest of it were very, very deliberate. They knew this had to be a carefully orchestrated communications campaign, and you needed to win allies one solar roof to another. When Ontario rolled theirs out, the minister in charge of it, the guy who'd kind of made it happen, decided he wanted to run for mayor of Toronto, so he stopped advocating for it. The government of and it was a liberal government that believed firmly in what it was doing, but there seemed to be this assumption of like, well, green energy's good, so people will see it and they'll go, hey, good, that's good. And instead, what happened was these mainly European wind developers formed partnerships, like little sort of Ontario satellite companies. Those companies found the best wind resources, leased all the land from whatever farmers, and by the time they were getting to like pouring concrete for the bases of these wind turbines, then they were like, oh yeah, we also, the legislation says we have to have a town meeting. So we'll have a town meeting where all these people who are pissed off to find out that they don't get a wind turbine on their property and they're not making any money off it, and it's going to like spoil the view that they've been enjoying for the last 50 years. We'll let them stand up and yell at us, but there's no actual dialogue happening here. And this happened, one place after another across Ontario, to the point now where Ontario is, like rural Ontario, small town Ontario, ferociously hostile, not just to wind energy, to anything green energy. I've seen anti-solar, like handmade, stop the solar farm signs, because this is how hated this thing became. And I think it's an example of, it's not enough that the thing you're doing is good for the planet, and here's your bitter pill to swallow. There was a complete failure of communications and messaging around that. Instead of it being, hey, you know what, Ontario is going to be like one of the first major jurisdictions in the entire West to completely eliminate coal from our grid. No more coal. Look at this. We're doing. We're creating jobs in the solar industry. We're creating jobs in the wind industry. Hey, lots of small farmers are getting a chance to make some money off the leases. Where they could have very easily, as they do in Germany, give communities an opportunity to directly invest in the solar renewable energy developments near them. They did none of that, and it turned out people decided. In the absence of a story about why this was happening, people were like, "What is this crap?" And it was, it's not a failure in the sense, there's wind farms and solar farms, and they're generating clean energy, and there's no more coal in the grid, so it's a win. But it also it poisoned the well for the entire country. It made it harder to do wind energy in Alberta because people said, oh, I hear in Ontario that went really badly, and people got mad, and it doesn't work or whatever. To the point you talk about, to come back around to myths, there was a legitimate belief. There's one wind turbine on the waterfront in Toronto, on the old Canadian National Exhibition grounds, the X grounds, and anti-wind advocates in this one part of up the coast of Lake Ontario had convinced people that it didn't actually, it legitimately didn't work from an engineering point of view, and that there was a small gas turbine, like a little diesel generator gas turbine or whatever, inside the windmill that made it spin, and that it was entirely a hoax perpetrated by, I don't know, George Soros and David Suzuki or whoever, like it was just, and that is the degree to which you can like, that is how bad it can bite you if you mess up the messaging, and you don't make this a story about the people who the change is happening to.
Well, and the damaging effect is massive, because you didn't just lose that town of angry people, angry old white people. I mean, you lost that generation almost because of the internet, and their kids are also influenced. So, you're just a setback which you would never have had before because of our opportunities for communicating and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Damn. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a crazy case, and now there was a whole bunch of other stuff going on outside of this, like that gets into the minutia of Ontario politics. But so it wasn't just that they messed up the messaging on the Green Energy Act, but the Green Energy Act got sucked into this larger story about government incompetence and wasteful spending and rising energy prices, in part because the government was so bad at telling its own story, and not even telling its own story, but inviting the people. Like, there are lots of little, small farmers and the rest who are making really decent money off the leasing of their land, but those people aren't at the microphone at the town hall meeting, talking about wind turbine syndrome, so
hashtag wind cancer.
Yeah. Which is absolutely got to be. The cancer thing is just Trump's weird brain, but like the wind turbine syndrome, that was a legitimate targeted disinformation campaign. It started with one family physician, I think, from upstate New York, and she would look at places where, it looks like they're doing, Ontario. It looks like they're doing a bunch of wind in Ontario. I'm gonna start having a series of kind of conferences that look like professional conferences, where basically they exist to plant this idea that there is this thing called wind turbine syndrome, that if you live close to wind turbines, it makes you, gives you all kinds of chronic headaches, and it makes it hard to sleep, and eventually your immune system breaks down, and it's all because of the oscillation of the turbine. There's absolutely no medical science. But now the thing that people have pointed out to me, though, is a lot of the stuff she talks about are symptoms also of stress. And so the people in these, if your community is suddenly at each other's throats all the time, you're probably stressed out. And so this person shows up and says, "Yeah, you have wind turbine syndrome." Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But yet all of Denmark with 30% wind power. Yeah, we seem to be doing okay, right?
Or Portugal. I think, what's the penetration in Portugal? Might even be higher than that.
No, we got the world record for wind.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that's a portion of the grid anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, we had
well, every now and then it's more than 100%. Like it's like on the right kind of day, Denmark will produce more wind than it can use.
We had an entire month where we were 100% wind. Like, it was December, so it was winter, good storms in the winter. So yeah, it was just 100%. It was like 100,000%, whatever. But I mean, and Portugal, they have the world record for running on renewables for an entire month.
That's probably what I'm thinking.
Yeah, but it wasn't just wind; it was also hydro and other stuff, right? Solar, right. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, dude. You're off to Bornholm, the bright green island.
I am. Speaking of wind energy, one of the world's most interesting and sophisticated smart grid experiments. Kind of a little glimpse of what a future, and actually, it's not a bad place to end this. We're talking about the things that are just better. We're not 100% there yet, but the fact that basically an electric vehicle, which we can talk about why they're not. You don't want to swap out every car on the road for an electric car. We want fewer cars in our cities and the rest of it. But if you are living somewhere where a vehicle is going to make sense, you have this battery that basically sits like most cars. I can't remember the figure, but it's 90-some% of their working life they're not actually being operated. They're just parked somewhere. And this is on Bornholm. This has been part of this ecogrid experiment. Is you've got wind energy tends to blow strongest at night when no one needs power. Store it in car batteries. Drive the car to work, and then plug it back in and start brokering energy back to the grid. And if that was if this was sort of the value proposition, hey, you could, part of this climate change action that you need to take in your life is you're going to get an electric car, and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but Norway leads the world in electric car sales, not because Norwegians are so incredibly altruistic and concerned about the environment. It's because there's a luxury tax on all other kinds of vehicles that doesn't apply. It's a huge, really steep luxury tax, and it doesn't apply on on electric cars. So that makes electric cars affordable. Well, sure, I'll buy an electric car then. So you buy your affordable electric car because it's exempt from the climate tax, and you fuel up on the cheap. You're juicing the battery up at night when wind energy is cheap, and then you're plugging it back into the grid and then selling it back at a profit. That's there's an argument you could sell to a Republican, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think we did pretty good considering we have a hangover.
Not bad. I'm not. Yesterday would have been a less lively conversation.
Yeah, I know, right?
I feel a bit better now.
We're sitting outside in the spring sun. It's not so cold, so
Yeah.
we're doing all right. Thanks
right.
for the time, brother.
Happy to be here.
All right, see you next time.
Yeah.
We're talking about climate change and fighting it and adapting our cities to it. We're talking about it more than ever before. The conversation has advanced. Absolutely. There is still, however, a disconnect between the narrative and positivity. I've often wondered what it would look like if urbanism had a profile on, let's say, Tinder. It would be a cool profile. Lots of positive imagery of urban redesign, tactical urbanism projects with friends, taking back the streets, having a barbecue, drinking some beers while doing it. It would be fun, cool, and sexy. If climate change had a profile on Tinder, man, it would be dismal. Dark and depressing and somber. Swipe left every time. I just think that urbanism and climate change should both swipe right on each other. Maybe even super-like. Meet up, get a bit drunk, go home and have some awkward sex, but then wake up in the morning and realize, hey, maybe we could work together. Let's hang out. Spinning climate change adaptation positively is crucial if we are serious about inspiring behavioral change. There are so few examples out there, but all the good ones are in cities, tackling local issues. That's where we'll make a difference. Not with your national politician, but on your street, in your neighborhood, in your city and town. That wraps up another episode of the Coolville Urbanism Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Colville-Andersen. Thanks for listening. And remember, it's your city. Take it back.